Hello, everyone. My name is Chow, and I am CEO of AT&T Business and a proud Asian American. Thanks so much for tuning in with us today for what I know will be a compelling and thought-provoking conversation. So May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And as we continue to celebrate this Heritage Month, I'm excited to lead and participate in a discussion about how we can all take an active role in supporting the AAPI community. As all of us know, we're at a pivotal point in our society and as a country. And the social justice movement, as we have experienced a racial awakening, if you will, a racial reckoning over the past year and a half, really compels us to think about how we can move forward together so that we can continue to make progress in all facets of our society. As many of you are well aware, we have experienced an increase in hate crimes and hate incidents against the AAPI community, and this is clearly an issue. We sit at the precipice of a significant amount of change that we can all be part of. We here at AT&T, we are all about creating connection. And what we've learned together as a society, as a community, as a company, and as a team over this past year and a half is that there is nothing more powerful than the human connection. And that each of us need this connection to thrive, not only survive, but to thrive together and make advancements. Why is this year different? Well, I think there is always a reason for everything that occurs. And, probably fortuitous that this discussion is happening now. Just yesterday, the president signed into law the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which overwhelmingly passed by majority last month by the Senate and earlier this month by the House. And so we sit at a point in time where real change is happening, and real change can happen if each of us chooses to engage. And so I am so honored to be joined by a distinguished set of panelists whom I'll introduce now. And together we're going to have a real frank discussion. As all of us, we like to do here at AT&T, have very candid, connected, compelling conversations. So let me welcome our community partners today. With us, we have Emily Chi, who is the Assistant Director at the Asian Americans Advancing Justice. Thanks so much, Emily, for joining us. Happy to have you here. Great.
Thank you.
I also have Phil Tajitsu Nash, who is a board member at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Hey, Phil, thanks so much for joining us. Great. Okay. We've also got Masashi Niwano, who is the Festival and Exhibition Director at the Center for Asian American Media. Masashi, thanks so much for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, and I love your spectacles match my my top here. So I think we're all about that red. So love it. Okay, so let's just dive right in then. Let's dive right into the questions. So I'd love for each of you to start out with just introduce the audience to your organization, your leadership, and how you came to work in partnership with the AAPI community. Emily, let me start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Emily Chi. I'm the Assistant Director of Tech, Telecom, and Media Diversity at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, which is based in Washington, D.C. Advancing Justice, AAJC, is a civil rights group that represents the interests of AAPI communities and other historically marginalized communities. We mainly focus on issues like immigration, census, voting rights, obviously anti-Asian hate incidents, tech and telecom policy, and media diversity. And the way I got involved in working with AAPI communities is, I grew up first generation Korean American in a low income single mother household. And I just saw so much disparity between the way we were just depicted as model minorities and the way I was actually growing up and the issues I was seeing in my community, and realizing how much of our history and our experience was being erased. The parts I was the most proud of, the engagement my family had in anti-imperialism movements in South Korea during Japanese occupation, the demonstrations my mother had participated in as a student in anti-authoritarian protests in South Korea, and just our history of coming here with nothing and not having the glamorous, crazy, rich Asians' lives, right? And so that's kind of how I got involved and why I love doing what I'm continuing to do today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit of your story there. Phil, how about you?
Well, I represent the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And I want to thank AT&T because they've been not only a longtime supporter of ALDEF, but when I was the founding director of the Asian American Justice Center, where Emily is now, they were the ones who gave us a grant right at the beginning, a large grant that helped to get things going. And I can speak for many groups in the Asian American community. AT&T has been a wonderful sponsor. So thanks for all that you've been doing for all of us. So ALDEF at this time is very active in issues of anti-Asian violence, voting, economic justice, immigration, et cetera. We, like AJC, are part of a justice ecosystem that includes other legal defense funds doing work for the Latinx community, the women's community, the LGBT community. We're all part of finding justice for all people. You can't just stop and say, justice is for me. It's for everyone. And so that's why it's great to be here with Emily, with Masashi, with all of you. ALDEF has a strategy of looking at prevention, intervention, and legislation. And what that means is doing public education like this, doing workshops, clinics. Intervention means when there are violent incidents, then you have to use your burstable bandwidth to expand out and do the work yourself, or just do the intake and help to get those cases over to other people. And a lot of this is not glamorous work. It's stuff behind the scenes. It's not seen on TV. Helping people with culturally and linguistically important, appropriate services is hard work. And that's why we appreciate the support of AT&T and all of you individually. And legislation means looking at the ways that we can change the laws, because when somebody gets hit on the head in an anti-Asian violence incident, that is one person hurting another person. But there are systemic issues. And as Emily pointed out, this is a bigger issue. There are global forces going on here. There are ways that people are hurt by implicit bias, by so many other things. And so we have to look at the big picture as well. I personally got involved in this through the Japanese American redress movement. My mom and her family were in the Japanese American camps during World War II. So I got involved with that. I got involved with ALDEF as a law student, actually, and have been on the board for 4 decades. So I've been around. I'm kind of a dinosaur here, but I am still glad to be doing this. I practice sustainable activism. I try and do a little activism every day. And so that's my story.
Thanks, Phil. And you're not old, you're seasoned. There's a lot of wisdom there. I resemble that. I resemble that remark. Okay, thanks for sharing. Masashi, how about you? Tell us a little bit about you and your organization.
Sure, yeah. So, and thank you again for having me here. So I work at Center for Asian American Media. We're the nation's largest media arts organization that showcases, supports, and celebrates Asian American stories. So at CAM, we have various parts of our organization. We have educational distribution, and we have hundreds of Asian American films that we give to colleges, educational institutions around the world. We fund documentaries that will be on public television. We produce a lot of content. The Asian Americans was a series we just finished last year, which is a 5-part series talking about the kind of migration of Asian Americans. And then we have the festival, and I'm the festival director. This is my 10th year. And I do, again, want to thank AT&T. It is with support of AT&T and companies like AT&T that keeps this festival going. One of the things I'm very proud of is to have a festival that can be as inclusive as possible. And since I've been at CAM, we have not raised our ticket prices once. And and living in San Francisco, prices have gone up for everything. And so it is with the generous support of sponsors like AT&T that helps us keep our tickets low. As far as myself goes, growing up, I have immigrant parents. They worked very long nights. and my mother did not trust babysitters. I don't think she actually knew how to find a babysitter for me. So she took me to the video store, and I would rent 10, 12 VHSs for the weekend, and I would just watch them through. And that sparked my interest in storytelling, filmmaking. I went to film school. While I was in film school, one of my amazing teachers and mentors, Anita Chang, who is here in San Francisco, told me about CAM, the Center for Asian American Media, and said, I think you would really be interested in this organization. So I interned there for 2 years. I loved it so much, I created my own internship to stay at CAM for a third year. And then, through my internship at CAM, I knew that I still, I'm so excited about being a storyteller, but the connection to community and the power of storytelling was so important. And kind of interning at CAM, I realized how many stories there are. And for myself growing up, I didn't see a lot of representations of Asian Americans. So I didn't have a lot of role models that connected with me personally. And working at CAM, I saw so many community leaders who were represented in films or characters in really rich Asian American films that I just didn't know I couldn't get at that video store. So since my internship, although I have moved around, I was in Texas for many years, I've always been part of CAM, and I'm just really thrilled to be the festival director here at CAM and to continue to bring these stories to light.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story. I was thinking through as each of you were speaking there, something that we all share is this pride, right? This pride in our community, or this pride in our culture. And in so many ways, it connects us even more deeply, right, than other facets of who we are, or even the work itself. I had an opportunity, and Phil, I was reflecting on this because I was actually on the board at AAJC for, I think it was 12 years, and in fact, vice chair at a point there. And so I too have always felt this desire to become more active and more engaged, right, and do more than my part because of all the people around us, not the least of which are our parents, right, who set the foundation for who each of us are, right, in so many ways. One of the things, and Masashi, you actually just touched on this, about the lack of role models, out there, as you were growing up. I know certainly I felt the same way. If each of you could perhaps comment on how have the images of AAPIs in the media and film impacted your life, or in the workplace or in your daily life? And perhaps each of you could reflect on a personal experience. We've all heard the saying, "You cannot be what you cannot see," right? And if that were in fact true, I would hypothesize that none of us would be where we are today, right? And so talk a little bit about that, about those images, those perceptions that shaped you, whether they were there or not, and how that kind of fueled you in your personal experience. Masashi, I'll start with you. It's the obvious place to start on this question.
I think I would just kind of continue what you were saying there. Growing up, I knew from very early on I was a creative person. I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker or work in the arts. When I was 8 years old, I had a video camera and I was making little short films instead of playing sports. So, and this took many years of myself thinking about, but when I first started, my parents were kind of saddened by it. I think they wanted me to be something different. I think they wanted me to be a doctor, lawyer. And, for a long time, I was disappointed that they weren't excited about me being a filmmaker, an artist. And then I realized, as what you were saying, is that because there's not a lot of representation of Asian Americans in media, for them, they couldn't see me as a successful director, as a successful creative person, right? And, looking back, I know they were so much cared about me and just wanted me to be happy, to be successful. And because they didn't see it, they were really concerned for me that was not something that was going to bring me success. And that's why representation is so important. It gives us a roadmap. It gives not only us, but our families, our friends, our kids, a roadmap of, okay, I see what that could be. I see that in media. This is your version of that. And because there wasn't any real representation, I'm talking kind of 80s, 90s, I think that was something that I wish I had more support up front, but now looking back, I totally understand that. And I do hope with more representation now that new generations of Asian Americans, depending on what they want to do with their lives, there's more of that in the world that they can look at and say, okay, that's what they did. Here's my version of that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you. Emily, how about you?
Sure. I always think back to the depiction of the Tiger Mom as one of my awakening moments. We grew up with a lot of negative stereotypes of Asian Americans, but I think in my mind, because I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area where there are so many Asian Americans, I always could distinguish, like, this is the reality of what Asian Americans are like in real life, and this is what they're like on TV, and there's a difference, and it's not going to affect me very much because I know that I live in this reality. But around when I was in high school was when the Tiger Mom phenomenon kind of gained speed. There were like all these articles on the Wall Street Journal. CNN actually did a mockumentary type piece of my high school, which was something like 80% Asian American, and talked about how, we were so academically stellar because of our Confucian values and our parents who taught us to, just study, 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 study. And for me, I was really offended by that because I grew up with women who have taught me the values of speaking up for those who are voiceless, for doing what is right, for pursuing your passions. My mother's a music teacher. She went to music school. She was the anti-Tiger Mom. Whenever I was studying at night, she told me, go to sleep, grades aren't that important, I'd rather have you be healthy. And so seeing that depiction of just one version of how Asian mothers can love was very offensive to me. And I think what was even more appalling to me was how willing and excited Asian Americans were to embrace that stereotype and celebrate it as like, yes, this is the type of Asian family we have and why we're successful. And so that's something I look back to, just thinking about, the moment that shook me, like, oh, representation does matter, and there's only one story being told, and it's so inaccurate, and it's it's a very large part of why the model minority myth is so persistent, and so it creates problems not just for our community, but for other communities of color, and so that was something that was really jarring to me that I go back to a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, Emily, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I remember the Tiger Mom thing really, really well, right? And in fact, I have been known to use it, right, in jest, tongue in cheek, compare characteristics of my mom to it, myself to it, right, what my daughters would think, and I hadn't really thought about contrasting it with the damaging nature of the model minority myth, right, which some Asians would say, yeah, I mean, that's a good thing, right, to be a model minority. But in actuality, it's actually incredibly divisive, right? And so this Tiger Mom, your take on the Tiger Mom is very interesting. I mean, there are parallels there. Thank you for sharing that insight. It's making me think a little bit differently about the next time I'm going to use Tiger Mom. Phil, how about you?
Well, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and so for me, I was used to not seeing any Asian Americans in the mainstream media. I remember when Bruce Lee first started doing movies, and the idea of having this guy take his shirt off and go like this, and all my friends said, "Hey, Bruce Lee!" All of a sudden, I didn't have to worry about getting beat up on the school ground. I didn't know anything about martial arts, but I could just, put that coat over my shoulder and pretend like I knew martial arts. But I actually was fortunate to grow up in a family that had some activism background, some journalism background. I wrote for the New York Nichibei, a bilingual Japanese-English paper back in the 70s and 80s, and it allowed me to have a voice. And we tied in with other Asian American papers all around the country. There was Asian Week, there was the Hokubei Mainichi. There are a lot of papers all around the country that were trying to capture the Asian American experience. I also was involved with a lot of the early organizations like Visual Communications, Asian Cinevision in New York. I was part of the Council on Interracial Books for Children in New York. I was part of the Asian Americans for Fair Media in New York. And again, we were trying to protest some of this Susie Wong, Fu Manchu stuff. And, who knows how successful we are. Masashi and his group are still protesting some of this stuff. But, we have had an impact. We did protest Miss Saigon and some of the other shows. So, you have to just keep protesting, because you can't just let somebody bully you or say something negative and not, reach back against that. But I do know that having positive portrayals, like the Grain of Sand album that came out with positive music for people who were involved in the Asian American movement. I was part of the Basement Workshop in New York City, which is a bunch of Asian American artists who are trying to write and do music and other things. So I've been both on the part of the community that's fighting back, and also the part of the community that's trying to build something more positive. And I hope that everybody in the audience will think about that as a paradigm for yourself. Create something beautiful for yourself and for your family and for your community, and at the same time protest when you see something negative that's hurting you and your self-esteem and the self-esteem of the other members of your community.
Mm-hmm. So beautifully said, Phil. I mean, it's, we all want to be heard. We all deserve to be heard, right? And sometimes when we don't see ourselves out there, or even, Masashi, like you were saying, we're influenced by others that we love because they have been shaped, right? Their biases and perspectives have been shaped, which then influence us. I mean, it is, it can be a virtuous cycle or it can be a vicious cycle, right? And, part of the opportunity for us together is how to try to make as much of the learning, much of the history, much of the present constructive, right? And learn from it so that it can, in fact, be a virtuous cycle and that we can move forward. Now, each of you have actually touched on this a little bit in your comments that you just made around some of the stereotypes, right, that you've experienced. I'd like each of you to be even more candid here with this question, right? And this one is really about stereotypes that stand out to you, right? What would you cite would be some of one of, whatever you want to share with our audience here, the most invasive and perhaps damaging stereotypes that are out there about the AAPI community. So Emily, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Two come to mind. First is the perpetual foreigner. So the belief that we don't belong, that we're from somewhere else. I think all Asian Americans have unfortunately experienced this, where strangers or folks that you don't know very well, one of the first questions they ask you is, where are you from? You're like, I'm from California. And they're like, no, originally, where are you from originally? And so it's an unfortunate common experience we probably all have. But we see that that's not just innocuous. This year with the rise in anti-Asian hate, there's this conflation of people who are of Asian descent with things like disease. We've been repeatedly scapegoated for things like poor economy, loss of jobs, disease throughout history. And even though it's been hundreds of years and many, many generations, we see that anytime something bad is happening in our society, folks are looking for outsiders to blame. And unfortunately, because we're still seen as outsiders, we're often the group that gets targeted. So with COVID-19, we're seeing a repeat of that, but also that has more of a psychological effect on us personally, right? I think for me personally, I resisted being too Asian for a good 20, 25 years of my life, where I didn't want to be seen as not American, and I kind of deliberately tried to whitewash myself. I never listened to K-pop. I never wanted to wear clothes that looked like it could be from Korea. I hated bringing Korean food to school for lunch because I didn't want to be seen as, an outsider. And unfortunately, that denied me, my roots and my history and things that I only later discovered I'm really, really proud of and that I enjoy. So that's one. And the second I'd say is, the fetishization and over-sexualization of Asian women. I think that's something that unfortunately most Asian women have experienced firsthand and have been harmed by. And, the very unfortunate incident in Atlanta just brought to light how prevalent that stereotype still is. And we are often dehumanized to, one just surface layer stereotype rather than being seen as unique and different humans. And so that's one thing I think of when something that personally and societally is constantly harming us.
Oh my gosh, Emily, I couldn't agree with you more on that. The when I'm talking about this whole notion of bias and stereotype, that where you are, where are you from? Where are you really from? Where are you like really from? Is a story that I tell over and over because it's it shows up on the what are the top 5 things you should never ask a Asian person, right? And it's universal, right? I mean, it's universal to the point where it's almost comical, but it's truly sad, right? And a bit inappropriate, right? At times. So thank you for sharing that. Phil, how about you? Stereotypes that you feel are just really damaging, invasive. What would you say?
Well, I think you had mentioned the model minority before, and Emily just did a great job describing the perpetual foreigner. The way that I tie those two together is to think about the notion of conditional citizenship, because you wonder, like, how can we possibly be these great things and this marginal thing? Well, conditional means that if you're here and you get good grades, good boy, you're a good accountant, sit in the back room and do the numbers. But if you come out there and say, hey, I want to get a fair wage, hey, I want to be the manager, all of a sudden you're a troublemaker and you're not the quote unquote model minority. And this notion of model minority, you have to ask yourself, why are we even considered the model? And why are we considered a minority? We are, more than 50% of the world's population, 4% of the population here. There must have been a filtering or blocking process that stopped us from coming in here. And as a professor of Asian American history, I've been looking back at the history, and I've noticed that there's even the words Oriens, Oriental. Oriens means where the sun rises, Occidens, where it sets. And the globe is spinning around. It doesn't say to itself, where's the middle? The middle is in Greenwich, England, in a little observatory up the Thames River from London. Somebody had the audacity to say, I am the middle. And you're looking at your watch, you are looking at Greenwich Standard Time. We are a couple time zones to the west of that or to the east of that. But again, that notion of east versus west, there's a book called Orientalism that gets into this a little more. But if you think about this east versus west, we can never be insiders. Like Emily's saying, we're perpetual foreigners. And when you have east versus west, all of you who are Central and South America, Oceania, Africa, you don't even count. You're not part of that. So when you think of being outsiders, we are always going to be outside. And it's a total social construct, because if you think of it, no Asian language has the word Asia in it. We have evolved those words just the same way we've evolved words for rocket ship. But when my family came here, they considered themselves Japanese. And then gradually in the 60s and later, we evolved this word of Asian America. But the notion of Asia involves a Euro-Asian landmass. And we Asians are from the eastern end of that, with Japan on the end. And the Europeans are on the western end of that, with England and the United Kingdom there. So again, we have to remember, these are total social constructs. We even have a map, the Mercator projection map, which takes the top half of the globe and makes it 2/3 of the map, so that the northern part is more important than the southern part. And if you look at the Peters projection map, which is more like what the astronauts see when they're going around the world, you see Africa is long, South America long. And so we have centered ourselves as the mostly white Europe and North American power elite, but they are really a very small part of the world. And we have to, as part of our thinking about Black Lives Matter, thinking about Asian American empowerment, thinking about Latinx and other people, think about not privileging one group of people, in this case, white privilege or European privilege. Think about recentering ourselves into a real world where all of us can be equal. We look for justice for all of us. We don't fall into this East versus West paradigm. And we don't think about this model minority, which basically is being used to tell Black and brown brothers and sisters, well, the system works and you are a failure. And we Asian Americans were brought in 1960s. Many of those people were very smart because they were the educated elite. If we had gone to Nigeria and taken the top 1% of people who were from the top universities and brought them here to study at our best schools and go work at places like AT&T or Bell Labs, we would have said, oh my God, there's no more A's left in my calculus class. There's 3 Nigerians here. So again, this skewed notion that Asian Americans are better than other people, that we are a model minority, or on the other side, that we are a perpetual foreigner. Both of these stereotypes have to end, and we have to stop this conditional citizenship where we can be wonderful people and then get hit on the head with a baseball bat. We don't want this. We want to just have the same rights and justice of every other person, of every other religion, culture, and background.
Oh my gosh, Phil, so many gems of wisdom and insight in what you said. I'm struck by this discussion that I've been having more and more with colleagues of mine on what does something being systemic mean, right? Like, what is systemic racism? What is systemic bias? And you've just outlined so beautifully and succinctly so much of where we are today has been shaped by those social constructs and how history has evolved, right? They perhaps were not at the time intended with malintent, but how they have evolved, right, have fundamentally shaped who we are as a society, as communities, as cultures, as countries, and in many ways is absolutely not constructive, right? I mean, there's bias in all of it, right? And it is systemic. And when I think about what you said, one of the things that I absolutely believe is that words matter, right? And you just gave so many examples of how even the choice of word, right, can influence and can shape and can bias, right? And so we have got to figure this out together. We have got to be talking about it, right, and learning about it so that we can actually make progress. Thank you for those comments. Masashi, how about you? Tell us about the stereotypes that you really find that that really burn you up or that you feel really are holding us back.
Yeah, I mean, after Phil, I just kind of want to say ditto. A good amount of what he just said was what I was going to say. For me, when I think about stereotypes, I do think of representation still, right? So for me, I think about Hollywood, cinema, and how continuing to now, but since the beginning, it's always been through a white lens. So as we talk about kind of systemic issues, that's the perspective, right? So as we talk about the foreigner kind of stereotype, or Emily, as you mentioned, like in Hollywood, I think we call it the dragon lady archetype, which is quite problematic. It's all kind of in this context of you have a hero, and then all of these characters who are the conflict of the hero. And to me, that's where the stemming of all of these issues are, because it's not in any way giving any humanity to these characters. If there are Asian American characters in a film, more recently there are, but I mean, up until recently, we didn't even have Asian Americans playing Asian Americans in film. So I think the connection between foreigner, model minority, maybe the dragon lady, is this sense that Asian Americans aren't really American. And we've already mentioned this before, but that there's this suspicion, right? Suspiciousness of who we are. Why are we here? What is our real goal? It's to take the jobs. It's to take whatever from the hero protagonist. And so I think that whatever the stereotype, and I think that this is important because when you see let's say a nerd character in films, like, that by itself, I see people going, that's not a big deal. Like, who cares? That's just a silly character. But that's part of this systemic issue of what is that character doing? And I should say, as someone growing up with that stereotype, I had bullies throughout high school cheating off of my tests. And I kept telling them, do not do that. I am not the person you should be cheating off of, and they got poor grades, and then they would get mad at me, and I'm like, I told you from the beginning, you should not be copying off me. But anyways, I think so. Two things. One, it is that the problematic stereotypes, and then the secondary one, and maybe what Phil was saying earlier, is that the lack of stereotypes or representation is so important too. And when you have Asian Americans as side characters or kind of peripheral, there is this sense that you are part of this world, but you're not the lead in your own story. You're not the person that we are all looking at. You're there, but on the sidelines. And I do think that can have a mental, that connects with us in many ways. And we in our own lives then think we're less than other people. And so that is seeing more Asian Americans behind the scenes and in front of the camera. I think is really helpful, I hope, for new generations. And luckily through like technology, social media, YouTube, I think more Asian Americans are able to be the leads of their own stories and to be able to tell their stories. So I know for my niece, nephew, they're finding their own heroes, which is great. But yeah.
Yeah, so powerful, right? I mean, don't we all aspire to be, I'll use your beautiful words, Masashi, we all aspire to be the lead in our own story, right? And who are others to judge or influence or degrade, right? Or belittle our own story. But this is the reality of API communities, right? In every facet of society, right? As all three of you have pointed out, we're there, we're doing the good work, right? But we're not the champions, we're not the leaders, we're not the heroes, right? Piggybacking on your comments there, and just so powerfully capturing the breadth of stereotype, but the consistency also of it, right? McKinsey and Company just came out with a study post, in terms of COVID's impact on Asian American workers, and one of the stats that came out of it is that Asian Americans, are facing very steep drop-offs, right, in workplace representation at senior levels, even before COVID, but it's being exacerbated now, in particular for Asian women. As COVID, has unfolded, right? And just a couple of interesting facts here, that the share of Asian American women at senior levels is 39% lower than at entry-level positions. And for Asian American men, it's an even steeper drop-off, 64% less representation at senior levels than compared with entry levels. And of course, we also sadly know that our colleagues in the Black community, as well as Hispanic and Latino employees, also experience those drop-offs. So can we pivot now to, we've talked about these stereotypes, we've talked about the damaging nature of them, we've talked about how important it is to be heard, right, to surface these and work to understand them. Let's talk about how this translates into perhaps even a more viscerally painful topic, which is microaggressions in the workplace. Okay, so I'd like for each of you to talk about maybe a couple of examples, perhaps that you have experienced in your workplace as you think about the journey of your career, or others that are close to you. Of course, anonymized, right? If you could talk specifically about microaggressions, because I think while some may be listening to our conversation and say, okay, yeah, I get it, and I get that stereotypes are damaging, but shouldn't you guys just buck it up? You know what I mean? Just like, hey, just let it roll off you, right? It's just people are making fun. It's really not damaging. But the reality is that it actually is, right? And we see them in microaggressions, as well as in the worst case, hate crimes, right? And actually loss of life. So let's bring it into the workplace then. Phil, I'm going to start with you on this one. Microaggressions in the workplace. Thoughts, examples?
Well, the first day I started teaching at a law school back in the 1980s, there were very few Asian Americans teaching there, and I went to pick up my books during the summer, and I had my hair greased back. I had darker hair, and I had my leather jacket on, and I was walking there, and I said to the guard, "I'm one of the faculty," and he said, "Wait a minute, no, you're not." And he called the administration, found out indeed I was one of the faculty. So I went in and got my books, and we became good friends. So it didn't mean anything bad. But again, there was not a notion that somebody who looked like me would be teaching, and would have the audacity to say he was teaching. Another example, when I was taking some bottles to the store to get the 5% deposits, I was a struggling student like many of you, and I picked up some dirty bottles, walked into the grocery store, and the manager said, "Hey, Pedro, get out of here with those bottles." And again, because I'm multiracial, maybe thought I was Latinx or whatever, but he had two guys throw me out of the store. I was just there to try and buy a few things and do my good deed with these bottles. So luckily, I was a law student. I went back and put my suit on and filed a complaint against him. But again, these type of things happen all the time because the way our world is, we look at the great things that are happening to Asian Americans. We look at the wonderful accomplishments, but we sometimes don't look at these systemic, both interpersonal and systemic problems that are happening to us from the laws, from court decisions, from all sorts of things. And we don't think of ourselves. The third part of Asian American history that I teach is the good stuff, the barriers, and the third thing is we fight back. And in fighting back, we vindicate rights for all people. And I think that third part is so important now because we are part of this Black Lives Matter uprising that's happening. And we're not just people who are defined by anti-Asian violence, the things that are done to us. We have a sense of agency. We are people who are not just the Susie Wongs, like Emily was saying, we're not just the exotic women. Like Masashi was saying, we're more than just the stereotypes we see. We have a sense of agency. So for me, I was the victim of these stereotypes. Luckily, I was able to move beyond them. It did hurt at the time. I mean, I thought about it. Luckily, I was able to fight back in the case of that grocery store incident. But these microaggressions happen all the time in various ways.
Mm. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Masashi, how about you? Microaggressions?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. When I lived in Texas for 5 years, and this is not a dig on Texas, but when I did move there, I had many jobs throughout my time there, and there were some very similar experiences throughout. And again, not a dig on Texas, but I think the first start was, I remember when I started at the job company that I worked for that were going to send me to all the different companies. They looked at me and instantly said, "Oh, we love you. You're obedient. You're going to be trustworthy." Without even really reading my resume, they just saw me. And I know they were just really going off of just kind of the stereotypes, right? And I know kind of in hindsight, they put me in jobs where they knew I wasn't going to complain. And I do think, as we talked about with stereotypes and this needing to kind of almost prove ourselves that we're valid being here, I think they knew because of all of that, that I wouldn't complain about whatever they were going to what task they were going to put me towards. So I think that is something that I've, hit up has happened to me often. I think we've already talked about, I think to me, the ultimate microaggression is the where are you really from? I definitely in my life, I've gotten that a lot. And I remember at one company, it was about 20 people who worked there. And it was the 20th person asked me, where are you really from? And I remember just giving them, because normally I didn't kind of show frustration. But at that last one, I'm like, okay, you just ask the other people because they already know. And I remember them saying, why is that such a big deal? I just want to know more about you. It always feels a little bit like a stab because you're almost having to explain yourself, how you got here, But secondly, my response was, I've had to tell my origin story now to everyone in this company. That's why this is really frustrating. It's not just what you're asking me. It's my background. It's what I've had to deal with for my 4 months that I was there. So I definitely think those are things that you just, sadly, that come up. And you have to figure out the right way to respond. As
we mentioned before, right, we've all dealt with it. We're all going to continue to deal with it. And it's so interesting, I think, because people are asking you that simply because you look different, right? I mean, I don't really know you, right? But then, one of the things that I've learned about that question is, most of the time there actually isn't malicious intent. It's just like, hey, they have no clue. That's not the right way to ask it, right? If you want to know somebody's ethnicity, just ask them. So what's your ethnicity, right? You know what I mean? If you want to know where they went to school, just ask, where did you go to school? Or, if you want to ask, where did you grow up? Just ask, where did you grow up, right? The way that it's put is so, it's a microaggression, right? It's a microaggression. I was in a conversation with a colleague of mine. We were doing a fireside, in similar format. He's a Caucasian male, very senior in our company, wonderful diversity, equity, inclusion champion. We're both second generation Americans. His parents immigrated, right, from Europe, right? And in this conversation, he actually reflected. He's like, and we're both Americans, second generation Americans, but I've never ever in my life gotten asked that question, right? And it was kind of like a very profound moment. And simply it's because of what we look like, right? And those systemic sort of social, constructs that have fueled the fact that difference may not be good, right? So, so thank you for that. Emily, how about you? Stereotypes and microaggressions,
Yes.
and how they have manifested.
Yes. So one repeat offender is the idea that Asian Americans are that diligent, supportive side character, kind of what Masahi was talking about before. In the movies, we see that in the workplace all the time. And I think it's going back to history, it started with Chinese railroad workers kind of being seen as, well, they're good for their labor, but we're not going to give them any, equal pay or any rights, or include them in the photo of that final nailing of the railroad completion, and wanting to put us in our place, right? Like Chinese men were only allowed to have jobs that were traditionally available to women, like doing laundry or gardening. And we unfortunately see that staying persistent, where, if we are, hardworking worker bees, were kind of praised and seen as like, oh, they're so efficient, they're good at what they do. But as soon as we desire something more, where we want a position in leadership, where we want a promotion, all of a sudden that stereotype flips, and we're seen as like over ambitious, like wanting too much, being that tiger mom type aggressive Asian woman. So you see how quickly it flips, and it's never about us. It's always about how are we seen in relation to a powerful, usually white, already in a certain higher position individual. So we're not seen, as our own whole selves, or only kind of seen in relation to kind of what Phil was saying, like who is seen as the center, who has claimed their position as the center. So I think about this experience I had years ago when I was in college as an intern, where I was in an office with a lot of Ivy League educated, confident, well-dressed white men. And they actually called me Lloyd, who is a character, if you're not familiar, from the show Entourage. And he is a Korean gay man who is the assistant to one of the main characters. And they always said, oh, Lloyd, no, you're cool. You can come with us. You're like one of the guys. You're Lloyd. And at the time, I didn't really know how to react, because frankly, I was just thankful to be included in a group of white men who had a lot of power in the office. But reflecting on that now, I definitely internalized that racism, and I limited myself to positions that were only supportive of their work. I never took positions of my own, or asked for my own projects, asked for a promotion. Stayed silent when I thought I needed to be silent. And so I think it's harmful, to us, and leaves that lasting impression. And then the other thing I'll say is that perpetual foreigner thing also persists in the workplace, where Asian Americans are kind of only trusted for our expertise when it comes to things that are Asian. So even though I'm someone with a tech policy and privacy expertise, my opinion is sought out when we have an Asian client, or when there is a national security issue that involves an Asian country, or it's Asian American Pacific Heritage Month, and they're like, what event should we have? Which speaker should we invite? And so there's this persistence of like trust only exists when there is an Asian issue on the table, and when it's something else, even if we've trained for it, we've had years and years of experience, there's kind of this, oh, we'll defer to someone else who actually has the expertise and isn't the Asian person in the room, because you're just here as a diversity Asian representative. So that's something that I still see as an issue.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So it's just really, really insightful. I mean, the examples that you've given really bring to life that, they sub-optimize the individual, right? The person, you in this case, right? Who is the one who is experiencing those microaggressions, right? And it's sort of this vicious cycle of it causes us to doubt ourselves, right? And it shatters our confidence piece by piece by piece, right? I mean, it is this never-ending, fight, right? Is this never-ending, forging ahead, but piece by piece by piece, we can be shattered, right? And one of the things that I think is so interesting, that is so, quite frankly, disappointing and fuels, I know, my passion for advocacy and activism is, I would have thought, right, that it would have gotten better, in my 3+ decades in industry and in tech, right? But what I see in Asian women and young Asian professionals today is the almost exact same thing as 30 years ago, right? And it's just, I mean, it's a problem, right? And now, why should everybody care? And this will be my segue into the last question that I'll ask each of you guys to work through here. As we close the program down, why should everybody care? Well, look, I mean, we all have something unique to bring to the table. Teams and output and innovation are suboptimized if each member of the team isn't equally heard, isn't equally given an opportunity to contribute to that ultimate work product, work impact, to that output, right? So by definition, you're actually harming not just the individual, but the actual efficacy of the team, of the organization, of the company, right, of the community in a much broader sense. And so, equality and justice is something that is so important for all of us, right? Not just those who are part of perhaps marginalized communities, but all of us. We should all want to move forward and be better. And so I'm going to ask in a little bit of a perhaps lightning round, if you will, here, since we have less than 10 minutes left, is to ask each of you to think about and share, what would you ask of our non-AAPI colleagues out there? Combine that with your feedback on what are some resources that you would want to share with not only our non-AAPI colleagues and comrades and allies, but also our fellow AAPIs out there. So if you could kind of combo your response in a little bit of a lightning round here, that would be wonderful. Emily, since you're on screen with me right now, I'll start with you.
Sure. Really quickly, I'd say love us for who we are, get to know our genuine stories. We're fully human. So delve deeper than that first layer that you've been taught. We are limited to. Go beyond that and treat us as people and friends and family that you love. And then the second thing I'd say is we have a great resource at AJC, which is a Bystander Intervention training that is free to everyone. It's online, and you can log on to find out how to be a better ally, how to react when you see instances of microaggressions, of explicit racism, and actually take action and responsibility for it, because it's on all of us, not just the individual who is the victim.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Emily. Phil, how about you?
I would say that every person of every background needs to start every interaction with another person with a sense of humility, not entitlement. And what that means is, when we talk about white privilege, we talk about certain people feel they're the center. And again, no one is the center. We are all the center of our personal universe, but even within your family, you are one family member. Within your community, you're one community member. And remember that we're all swimming in an ocean of isms. Every person is wet. I am racist. I am sexist. I am homophobic. I am ageist. I have learned throughout my life to try and be less of those things by being a humble person, by not feeling I'm entitled to anything. If I say something racist or sexist, I hope people say to me, Phil, you can do better than that. And so at this point, I don't make those gasps very much, but I have not lived a life walking on eggshells. I lived a life trying to be true to myself, true to my community, true to the cause of justice. And so people see I'm somebody worth spending the time to try and make him a better person. I think that's the attitude that we all need, because we're not going to solve this by just dealing with the big systemic issues, although we need to spend our time on that. We need to also focus on our interpersonal issues, because conflict is the only thing that's going to be constant in your life. And sometimes it's going to be fighting over the channel changer. Sometimes it'll be big intractable issues like we're seeing in the Middle East. But the bottom line is how you learn how to resolve those conflicts. How do you de-escalate? How do you build a cultural competence toolkit so that you will be able to learn how to look at a person who is your colleague, maybe your spouse, maybe your subordinate. These people are all going to be different from you. They will have a different language, a different history. And we just stop using the word white. There is no white person. My dad was of European ancestry from England and Scotland. This is a social construct created to try and galvanize these people from Southern Europe, Northern Europe against the people of color. So if you are a white person, learn about your heritage. You are multicultural. You have a mother's community, your dad's community. If you're Irish or Italian American, you suffer tremendous discrimination, tremendous anti-Catholic feeling in the history of this country. Learn about those things to learn some sympathy for what your Black and Brown and Asian American, Indigenous colleagues and friends and family are dealing with. Having that sense of empathy, humility, and getting rid of that sense of entitlement is the beginning for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Masashi?
Emily mentioned this before, but I think one thought is if you have curiosity about what it means to be Asian American, you don't have to go to an Asian American to ask what the answers are, right? So if you, for me, myself, I think, I myself am quite unique. And although I do think about the Asian American community and I do my best to represent the best for my community, it can be a challenge to always have to be there to represent, to explain. I mean, Asian American as a term itself is complicated. There are so many communities within there. I am not an expert on anything, maybe Japanese American experience that I live. So I would say, I do think, if there is curiosity, if there's interest in Asian American experience, if you have questions, thoughts, interests, there's a lot online. CamFest is my festival. I would hope that you can go there. You watch 100 films right now virtually that you can see a lot of different experiences. But I would just say, I think I appreciate that there are people who are interested. And I would say that you don't always have to go to the Asian American just to ask Asian American questions, right? And so we've already mentioned this before, but that would be one of my suggestions.
Great, thank you. Well, my goodness, what an incredibly enriching and empowering and insightful hour that we've just spent. On behalf of AT&T, I want to thank our community partners here, Phil, Emily, Masashi, for their candor, for their engagement, for their wisdom and their insight, and also their courage and vulnerability to be sharing, their true thoughts, even some of their own personal experiences of their journeys. To ensuring that we are better together. From an AT&T perspective, as all of us know, we have, strived to be a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion for decades. And we are proud supporters of the AAPI community. In fact, we have 6, employee groups across AT&T and Warner Media with over 16,000 employees who are members. And so for those of you guys out there who are not a member of any of these employee groups, feel free to please join. It is a wonderful way to engage together, and you do not have to be AAPI to be a member of the group. So that would be one of my thoughts for all of you if you're thinking about, okay, well, how do I continue my learning journey? Emily, Phil, and Masashi shared so many wonderful insights about how we all move forward, love us for who we are, we are all at the center of our own story and our own journey. And through each conversation, with humility and with an open-mindedness, with this desire to seek to understand and seek to learn, the foundations of our commitment to diversity sit in the fact that we know, right, that every voice matters. Every person matters. And that's what these discussions are all about. And I will close this program where I started, and that is about the power of connection. We all know that change happens and can happen one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one connection at a time. And so special thanks for all of you for tuning into this conversation. Again, thanks Emily, Phil, and Masashi for having this conversation with me. I look forward to advancing progress, advancing equality, advancing equity, advancing justice together out in the world together. And thanks everyone again. Happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month to all of you. Take care.